We grew apart, then found our way back. An emotional story inspired by night changes. When we were 17, Daniel and I made a promise. We'd be friends forever. We said it like we knew what forever meant. We didn't. Back then, forever was just another word for something we didn't think we'd ever lose. We lived 3 houses apart. Every morning, I'd knock on his window because his mother hated the sound of the doorbell. Every afternoon, we'd ride our bikes until the streetlights came on. And every night, we'd sit on the curb outside his house and talk about our future. We had it all figured out. Daniel would become a mechanic. I'd become a writer. We'd live in the same neighborhood. Our kids would go to the same school. We'd grow old and complain about our knees together. It was stupid. It was impossible. And at 17, we completely believed it. Daniel was the kind of friend who never needed to ask what was wrong. He'd just know. If I got quiet, he'd hand me half his sandwich. If I was angry, he'd sit beside me until I wasn't. If I had good news, he'd somehow find a way to make it sound even better. He wasn't the friend who gave long speeches. He was the friend who showed up. One summer, we got jobs at the same grocery store. We hated every second of it. Our supervisor hated us slightly more. We spent our lunch breaks behind the building, eating whatever snacks we could afford. One afternoon, Daniel looked at me and said, "Do you ever think about how weird it is that we're going to be adults soon?" I laughed. "We already are." "No." He shook his head. "Real adults." "What's a real adult?" "People who know what they're doing." I looked at him. "Then we're screwed." He laughed so hard he almost dropped his drink. We talked about leaving town after graduation. Not because we hated where we lived. We just wanted to see what was outside it. Daniel wanted to work somewhere bigger. I wanted to study writing. We promised we'd call every day. Then graduation came. And suddenly, our future wasn't something we talked about. It was something we had to actually live. I left first. A university 3 hours away. Daniel stayed. His father had gotten sick, and someone needed to help at home. I told him I'd visit every weekend. He told me I'd forget about him in a month. I told him he was an idiot. He smiled. "Promise." "Promise." The first few weeks were easy. We called constantly. I'd tell him about my classes. He'd tell me about work. We'd complain about our roommates. We'd talk until one of us fell asleep. Then the calls became shorter. Not because we cared less. We were just busy. My assignments got harder. His father needed more help. I made new friends. He started working longer hours. A week passed without a call. Then 2. Then one evening, I called him. He didn't answer. I tried again the next day. Nothing. Eventually, he called back. "Sorry." His voice sounded tired. "It's fine." "How's school?" "Good." "That's good." Silence. I waited for him to say something. He didn't. So I asked, "How's everything there?" Another pause. "Fine." It wasn't. I knew it wasn't. But I didn't know how to fix something I wasn't there to see. And maybe that was the first thing that changed between us. Not a fight. Not betrayal. Not some terrible moment. Just distance. Small at first. Almost invisible. Then one day, I realized I hadn't told Daniel something important. I had gotten accepted into a writing program. I stared at the acceptance email for almost an hour. He should have been the first person I called. Instead, I hesitated. Then I told myself I'd call him later. I never did. A week after that, he sent me a message. Just 4 words. "Dad's doing worse." I read it 3 times. Then called immediately. This time, he answered. Neither of us spoke for a few seconds. Then I said, "I'm sorry." Daniel breathed out. "Yeah." I wanted to say something useful. Something that would make the situation easier. But there wasn't anything. So I stayed on the phone. We didn't talk much that night. I just listened. And when the call finally ended, I realized something I didn't want to admit. Our lives were changing. Not dramatically. Not all at once. Just enough that the future we had imagined at 17 was becoming harder to recognize. And for the first time, I wondered if forever was something you could outgrow. Daniel's father passed away 2 months later. I went home for the funeral. I remember seeing Daniel outside the church. He looked different. Not older. Just quieter. I hugged him. He hugged me back. Neither of us said anything. Afterward, we sat in his car for almost an hour. The engine was off. Rain tapped against the windshield. I wanted to tell him I was sorry. I wanted to tell him I was there. Instead, I asked, "How are you doing?" Daniel stared through the windshield. "I don't know." That was all. So I stayed. For once, I didn't have somewhere else to be. When I eventually had to leave, Daniel walked me to my car. I told him I'd come back soon. He nodded. Neither of us said we'd call every day. We had stopped making promises like that. Life became busy again. I finished university. Moved to another city. Found a job. Then another. I started writing articles instead of the stories I dreamed about. Daniel became a mechanic. Eventually, he opened a small garage with a friend. We still talked. Just not often. Birthdays. Christmas. The occasional message when one of us remembered something that reminded us of the other. Sometimes we'd say, "We really need to catch up." We meant it. We just never did. Years passed like that. 7. Then 8. Then 10. At some point, Daniel got married. I found out through a picture online. I stared at it for a long time. He looked happy. I was happy for him. But there was a strange feeling underneath it. Not jealousy. Something harder to explain. I realized I'd missed so much. His wedding. His first house. The opening of his garage. Probably hundreds of ordinary Tuesdays. Things I would have known if we were still 17. I sent him a message. "Congratulations, man. I'm really happy for you." He replied almost immediately. "Thanks. Wish you were here." I stared at those 4 words. Wish you were here. I typed several responses. Deleted all of them. Eventually, I sent, "Me too." Then life continued. My own life changed too. I got married. Then divorced. Moved again. Changed jobs. Started writing seriously. Published a few things. Nothing huge. But enough to make me feel like the 17-year-old version of myself hadn't been completely wrong. Daniel and I remained somewhere in each other's lives. Not close. Not strangers. Something in between. Sometimes I'd see his name on my phone and smile. Sometimes months would pass without either of us saying anything. Then, one afternoon, I got a message from him. "You still coming home this Christmas?" I looked at it. Then at the calendar. I hadn't planned to. I had work, bills, deadlines, the usual reasons. But something about the question made me stop. So I replied, "Yeah, I think I am." Daniel sent back, "Good. Nothing else." Christmas came. I drove home alone. The town looked smaller than I remembered. The grocery store where we used to work was still there. The basketball court behind the school still had the same broken light. Even the street outside Daniel's old house looked almost exactly the same. Almost. I parked outside his garage. The sign above it read, "Martin Auto Repair." I stood there for a second, then walked inside. Daniel was underneath a car. I called his name. A pair of legs appeared from underneath it. Then his face. He stared at me. I stared at him. And suddenly we were 17 again. Daniel stood up. He wiped his hands on a rag. Then said, "You're old?" I laughed. "Look who's talking." He smiled. Then we hugged. It was awkward. Short. Familiar. We spent the afternoon catching up. He told me about his wife, his daughter, the garage, the house he'd bought. I told him about my writing, my divorce, my apartment, the things that worked, the things that didn't. We laughed about how different everything had become. Then, near sunset, we found ourselves sitting on the curb outside his garage. Just like we used to. 2 cups of coffee between us. Except our knees hurt now. Daniel looked at me. "Remember when we thought we'd live here forever?" I smiled. "Yeah." "What happened?" I looked at the street. "I guess we grew up." Daniel nodded. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then he said something that stayed with me. "I don't think growing up was the problem." I looked at him. "What was?" He shrugged. "We thought growing up meant we had to stop being the people we were." I didn't understand. Not completely. Daniel looked down at his coffee. "We kept waiting for our lives to become what we planned." He smiled. "Maybe that's why we kept feeling like we were behind." I thought about that. The careers, the marriages, the cities, the years we spent trying to become people we thought we'd be. Maybe we'd been so busy becoming adults. We forgot to notice who we were becoming along the way. That evening, Daniel asked me to stay for dinner. I did. We ate with his family. His daughter told embarrassing stories about him. His wife laughed. Daniel complained. I laughed harder than I had in months. And when I drove home that night, something felt different. Nothing in my life had magically changed. I was still divorced. Still uncertain about my career. Still nowhere near the life I'd imagined at 17. But I didn't feel behind anymore. Because maybe life wasn't supposed to stay the same. Maybe people weren't supposed to stay the same either. Maybe the point wasn't keeping everything you loved exactly as it was. Maybe the point was learning how to love what it became. The next morning, Daniel called me at 7:15. I almost didn't answer. Then I remembered where I was. "You're awake?" "Unfortunately." I laughed. "What's wrong?" "Nothing. I'm going for breakfast." "You coming?" I looked at the clock. Then at the suitcase I hadn't unpacked. "Give me 20 minutes. 10. 15. Deal." It felt strange. How easily we slipped back into something familiar. Not the same. Just familiar. We went to the old diner near the school. The place looked smaller than I remembered. Daniel ordered pancakes. I ordered eggs, Then he stole half my toast. Some things apparently didn't change. After breakfast, we drove around town. He showed me the places that had changed. The old movie theater was gone. The park had been renovated. The bookstore where I'd spent entire afternoons had become a pharmacy. We drove past our old houses too. Mine had been painted a different color. His had new windows. The world hadn't waited for us. That was the strange part. We had spent years believing we'd left our hometown behind. But it had been changing without us. Just like we had. Eventually, Daniel pulled over near the school. We sat in the car. Neither of us got out. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked. "Being 17? Yeah. I thought about it. Sometimes." "Me too." He looked toward the schoolyard. Back then, everything felt possible. I smiled. "Everything still is." Daniel looked at me. I wasn't sure if I believed what I just said. But I wanted to. He smiled anyway. Then he said, "You know what I regret?" "What?" "That we stopped telling each other things." I looked at him. He continued, "Not because we stopped caring." He paused. "We just started assuming the other person would understand." That one hurt. Because he was right. We had known each other for so long that eventually we stopped explaining ourselves. I assumed he was busy. He assumed I was happy. I assumed he'd call. He assumed I'd visit. And somehow, two people who once knew everything about each other's lives became strangers with 10 years of memories. I looked down. "I'm sorry." Daniel shook his head. "Me too." That was it. No dramatic apology. No fixing everything. Just two old friends admitting that they had both let time do what time does. Move. That afternoon, I helped him close the garage. Before I left, he handed me something. An old photograph. I recognized it immediately. Two 17-year-old idiots sitting on a curb. One holding a terrible haircut. The other wearing a shirt 3 sizes too big. I laughed. "Where did you get this?" "My mom found it." I stared at the picture. "We look so sure of everything." Daniel pointed at it. "That's the problem." "What?" "We thought those two guys knew what they were doing." I smiled. "They didn't." "Nope." He took the photograph back. Then handed it to me. "Keep it." I looked at him. "You sure?" "Yeah." I put it carefully inside my wallet. Then I drove home. A few weeks later, I received a message from Daniel. "You busy?" I replied. "Always." He sent, "Good. Let's get coffee." I laughed. So we did. Then we did it again. And again. Not every week. Not even every month. Sometimes life got busy. Sometimes we canceled. Sometimes one of us disappeared for a while. But we stopped treating distance like the end of something. We started treating it like part of it. Daniel's daughter eventually started university. My writing finally became something I could do full-time. His garage grew. I wrote another book. He sent me a picture when he finished renovating the office. I sent him a copy of my book before it was even available. He called me after reading it. "You're still terrible at endings." I laughed. "You're still terrible at reading." Fair. Years passed again. Not 10 this time. Not silently. We stayed in touch. We missed things. We changed. We grew older. But we kept finding our way back. One summer, Daniel and I sat outside his garage again. Same curve. Different knees. Different lives. He looked at me. Remember our promise? I knew exactly which one. Forever. He nodded. I smiled. We were idiots. Absolutely. We laughed. Then Daniel looked toward the street. You know what? We actually did it. I frowned. Did what? He looked at me. We stayed friends. I laughed. We didn't talk for 10 years. Details. I shook my head. But I understood what he meant. Forever hadn't looked the way we'd imagined. We didn't live 3 houses apart. We didn't see each other every day. We didn't know every detail of each other's lives. We became different people. We built different lives. We lost people. We gained people. We failed. We started over. We changed our minds. We changed our plans. And somewhere in all of that, we still found each other. Maybe that's what growing up really meant. Not keeping your life exactly the way you imagined it at 17. Not holding on to people so tightly that they can't change. Not being afraid of the distance. Maybe it meant accepting that everything changes. People. Places. Dreams. Friendships. Even you. And sometimes, the things that truly matter aren't the things that stay exactly the same. They're the things that change. And somehow still remain. Daniel nudged my shoulder. You coming back next Christmas? I smiled. Probably. Probably. I looked at him. Fine. I held out my hand. Promise. He stared at it. Then laughed. You're 30. So, you're still doing this? I waited. Eventually, he shook my hand. Fine. And just like that, we were 17 again. Not really. We were older. Much older. And our lives were nothing like the ones we'd planned. But maybe that was okay. Because when I drove home that evening, I realized something. I used to think the saddest thing about growing up was watching everything change. Now I think it's the opposite. The beautiful part is realizing that you can change too. And still find your way back to the people who mattered. Not to the life you had. Not to the person you were. But to something new. Something better. Something you couldn't have understood when you were 17. I don't know what Daniel and I will look like at 60. I don't know where we'll live. I don't know how often we'll see each other. But I know this. The next time life changes, I'll let it. And I'll call my friend. Because some promises aren't meant to keep life from changing. They're simply meant to remind you that you don't have to face the changes alone. Thank you for watching. Follow for more video like this.